And I'm just going to take you as quickly as I can through this story. And I got to tell this thing got it because I can't see it if I don't. All right. So genHERous was actually born in a conversation among women. I was at it was the last day of a democracy conference at Tufts University. And the very last session, a bunch of women gathered to have a conversation about women's issues. There was a dozen of us. 4 of the women were actually from African countries. And what you need to know is that each was from a different African country. And each of these 4 women were the very first women in their country to be studying a traditionally male subject. So they were doing accounting and law and computers, stuff that women had not done before. In the beginning of the conversation, these women were really quiet, and all the American women leaned in and took all the airtime. Always the facilitator, I noticed, and I invited our guests into the conversation. And what followed honestly changed my life. These women began to tell us stories about how their male peers literally signed up to take turns disturbing them during study period. And then they would all gather at the board where the grades were posted and talk amongst themselves in front of her about how she's going to flunk out next time. They told us about their professors who would not even acknowledge that they were in the room, always greeting the class with "Good morning, gentlemen." And they told us stories about the absolute necessity to never reveal anything personal about themselves because they knew it would be used against them. They were completely alone and they were under extraordinary pressure. When I asked them what was sustaining them, they talked about their strong mothers and their mentors. What was really amazing to me is these women had all been traveling as part of some development program. For weeks, they had been together. And until we had this conversation, they had never told each other this story. They had no idea that they were all living under the same ridiculously difficult sexual harassment and isolation. And what this conversation did is it let them find each other and form a network and have a support group that they took back to Africa with them and used telephones and internet in order to be together. So it was a pretty extraordinary conversation. But it left me asking a question, which is, I wonder what's going on with my younger sisters in this country. So I had my son at 40, and this was 2015. And so he had all these 20-something friends, and I began to interview the young women who were my son's friends and women from my church to find out what was going on with them. And what I learned is that they were suffering too. I also learned some new vocabulary like slut shaming and rape culture, words that I had never heard before. I was shocked. The women of my generation, women who came of age in the 70s and 80s, we thought we had made tremendous progress. We had women on the Supreme Court, women in the Senate, women in boardrooms. We had our own credit. We'd fixed this problem. Then I learned 2 other really disturbing facts. The self-esteem of women, some tool measures it, but it was at its highest in the 80s and has been going steadily down ever since. So that was the first one. The second one is that Americans are more segregated by age than we are by race. People can go for 2 weeks without having a substantive conversation with anybody within 10 years of their own age span. So obviously what I concluded is that the reason we can't see each other's suffering or benefit from each other's gifts is because we are just generationally separated. I began to think about how my generation, those women in the 70s and 80s, made so much progress and realized that it started in conversations. It started in conscious raising groups and individual mentoring sessions. We did it all by talking and listening to each other, by supporting each other, and by being supported and mentored by the women of other generations. We had so much to offer these young women. And frankly, from what I was listening to, they had a whole lot to teach us. So I created genHERous, intergenerational conversations among women, so we could build connections within and across generations, better know each other, nurture each other, support and enjoy each other. So that was the idea. Well, the first genHERous was at my house on April 14th, 2015, from 1 to 4, supposedly, in the afternoon. I invited 36 women. 6 each in each decade, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, right up to their 70s. I created 6 conversation circles and put a lot of good food in the middle of them. The agenda was, there was going to be a brief welcome and introduction, 2 rounds of conversation separated by a coffee break, and then a brief debrief and thank you, and we'd be out the door by 5 o'clock. In both rounds, we asked the same simple question. How has being a woman helped or hindered your ability to lead the life you most wanted to lead? And the sub-question was, how have other women helped or hindered your ability to lead that life? That was the whole conversation. In round 1, the women were organized 6 women of your age. So we put all the 20s in one room and all the 30s in one room. And we asked the women, as each one told their own story and answered that question, to be listening for the common themes for their generation as they listened to their peers. Then we had our coffee break. And in round 2, we organized the groups where we had 1 woman from each generation. And in those groups, we asked the women to share the story, the essence of the story that they had learned in the previous conversation, and then to just kind of have an open conversation about, okay, so what now? What next? What might we do for each other? Okay, so that was the plan. I spent the afternoon dropping in on these enthusiastic, deep conversations, one after the other, and listening to lots of laughter and, frankly, some tears. After round 2, we gathered everybody in the living room for what was supposed to be a brief debrief and a thank you. The problem was nobody wanted to leave, so they didn't. For the next 2 hours, there were women still in small group conversations all over my house. They organized themselves, decided that they needed to take a group picture. And then they decided that they wanted to do something together to pay it forward. So we took up a collection and we sent a young woman a check and paid her student loans for that month because we'd heard from the younger women that that was a big issue. So it was kind of the perfect ending to the day, even if they didn't leave till after 6 o'clock. I did a follow-up evaluation, and I learned that one of the problems was that in that second group, the older women had taken up all the airtime and not left enough time for the younger women to speak. So we changed the protocol, and in all subsequent genHERous, young women speak first in those mixed groups. Overall, it was a big success, and everyone left wanting more. So clearly, I'd figured out something that there was a need for, but I wasn't ready to go organize something major. And I said, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to give this away. And so I got a couple of the other women who were really good at putting up websites and making a logo. And we did a website, we put it out there, and we said, anybody who wants to run this, be our guest. And it's been run in New York and a couple of times more in Boston. And Sabrina found it. And that's how you wound up coming here today. And I have to tell you that I had talked to Sabrina before the pandemic started, and we were talking about doing this, and then I didn't hear anything else that I thought it hadn't happened. But when I found out you did have one last year, it was kind of like being proud of my kid that it stood up on its own. So I was really excited, and then I asked if I could be at this one today. So that's the story. It's the story of genHERous so far. We're going to continue that story today. And it came from a chance conversation among women, my own professional and personal life experience as a woman and a facilitator, and really my deep faith in the power of human connection and conversation, especially among women. So let's talk. Thank you.